5 years information services experience with careers in engineering, construction and health. He runs his own consultancy firm for 25 years. His approach has always been one of innovation, for example, introducing what's known now as Agile in 1983. From 2003 to 2010, he worked with a client in insurance to extend information systems into a new world of knowledge management. That client was awarded the Australasian Innovation Award for the project, and Ian was awarded for National Knowledge Management. Ian subsequently formed NOCO in 2011 in Australia to concentrate on knowledge management, and he also speaks internationally on knowledge management topics, as well as hosts the Adelaide Knowledge Management Network. Please welcome Ian to the stage.
Thanks very much, Lily. For us at NOCO, the sole and only purpose of a PMO is to have better projects. It's about the value add that you deliver to projects. So my little session today is very much going to concentrate on projects and project managers in particular. I'm going to do a bit of an overview of knowledge management, but we're going to really concentrate on the area of lessons learned. So first of all, what is knowledge management? For us, knowledge management is the movement of knowledge. If somebody has knowledge and won't share it, they're no good to us. If somebody needs knowledge and won't ask, they're equally no good to us. So first and foremost, you have a culture problem. You need to address those sorts of cultures and get movement of the knowledge. There's got to be practical knowledge. E = mc squared is a particular bit of knowledge I have. I have never used it. It is not practical knowledge. It is not the subject of knowledge management. And while I'm on the topic, we get asked the difference between information and knowledge. Okay, here's some information. A tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. That's a piece of information. I'll now move some knowledge to you. Do not put it in a fruit salad. Now that is knowledge which is either from experimentation or more likely has been passed on to you. So we're now starting to get a movement of practical knowledge. It must be the movement between people. Now knowledge management is very much a people-oriented thing. If, for example, in your organisation you have 2 or 3 subject matter experts, and those subject matter experts are willing to share and brief to share their knowledge, and knowledge seekers know that they can go to those people and get answers, then actually you don't need to have anything written down. You actually have this movement of practical knowledge between people happening without anything being written down. If you do create a knowledge artefact, it's likely to be like a Wikipedia article, a good introduction, but it will never be the whole story. So if you're looking at knowledge management, you definitely have to play with people. And it's a people exercise. And finally, it must result in action. Moving the knowledge around and people saying, oh yeah, you told me that last week, is no good. They actually have to modify behaviours. If they don't modify behaviours, you haven't actually moved the knowledge. So that's very briefly how we see knowledge management. It comprises, for us, a set of methodologies and flows. On the right-hand side, you have a knowledge provider. On the left-hand side, you have a knowledge seeker. And there's all sorts of steps and processes that go through. People, process, technology all interact with each other to create this. And down here we have the governance section, which is all important. Now, a lot of the loops and feedback loops and arrows have been taken off that diagram. It actually is much more complex than that, but that gives you some idea that, anyway, for us, there's an actually defined process. Another way to explain it is to look at the way in which we've taken knowledge management and broken it into a number of methodologies. So in the top right-hand corner, we have a number of strategic services like knowledge management assessments, creating frameworks, knowledge management plans, and that sort of thing. Then we have implementation support areas, like designing your knowledge management teams and all that sort of thing, pilot programs. We have a separate set of methodologies around culture. We have them then around facilitation, innovation, COPs. COPs are communities of practice. This is where you have a defined set up in your organisation where you have a number of subject matter experts who group together, and probably supported by collaborative tools, certainly open conversations, and they drive forward that subject within your organisation. Many companies have been very successful in running those. And here's the question: do you have a community of practice amongst your project managers? And up in the top left-hand corner, lesson learning, and we'll get more into that this morning. But there's one particular area here where in the implementation report, there's mention there of a project knowledge management plan. Now, can I have a show of hands, please? Who creates a project knowledge management plan? We've got one. Yes. Okay. If you're in the pharmaceutical business and you're in drug development projects, only 3% of your projects will ever deliver the target product. 3%. The other 97% deliver knowledge. And that's their sole outcome. Now what you guys have just told me is you are way over here on the other side of the equation. You are 100% devoted to delivering the target of the project. It's good. But you're 0% on knowledge. So a knowledge management plan for your project would start off by looking at what knowledge do we need to do this project, where do we have it, where are we going to get it, how are we going to learn during the project, how are we going to pass that on, how are we going to pass that on at the end. Because without knowledge, you're doing your project in the hope it's going to work, not in the knowledge that it will. So that's where we're going to go today. We're going to talk about knowledge within projects. I'm going to concentrate on lessons learned. But lessons learned can be approached from a number of different areas. Project management is only one of them. So please, your takeaways from today, please go back to your organisations and think about how lessons learned is going to be applied in these other areas. So what does lessons learned look like? Well, I've mentioned the project knowledge management plan, which is the starting point. Typically, after every stage or activity, there would be a debrief or an after-action review. We use the term retrospect for what would be a major stage review. A retrospect is probably a workshop going for, as Bob said, maybe half a day or a day. But typically, after-action reviews or debriefs are much shorter and should be done more often. The emphasis is on the sharing of lessons. Those lessons aren't shared. If people don't feel they can share, it's not going to work. But they're an important benefit in sharing. The next part of it is validation. I'm going through this very quickly. There's a lot more to it, but let's be brief. Validation is very important. With Rowena, and I'll pick on Rowena today, SA Water and their capital projects, they're building pumping stations, and in the pumping stations there's pumps. And say you get a lesson or an observation come in from one of the fitters. I lost half a day yesterday because I had to grind the end off all those bolts because they were sticking out and they were a safety hazard. Now that's good. That's the sort of thing we get back from your lessons learned. It needs to be validated. perhaps you used the wrong bolts. You used the wrong bolts for the actual lesson. The lesson is to get the right bolts next time, Charlie. So you do have to have this validation step, and that's very important, and that's where your subject matter experts get involved. So a lesson doesn't come in and immediately get action, it needs some validation, but that validation should not take too long. The key then is to create your action plan and execute it, actually do that, and therefore institutionalise that lesson back in the organisation. So this is the modifying behaviour part that I talked about before. Because if it comes in and that doesn't happen or it's held up, you haven't actually learned. And finally, the lessons should be searchable, so that people can go and say, well, what have we learned about these pumps before? It should satisfy the knowledge seekers and pre-stage learning. And I'll come back to that. I'm going to talk about this project learning and lessons learned, but there are some realities here. As I'm showing in this small diagram, there are technical limits to how much we can reduce or increase our performance or reduce the cost of a project. So there is the area of cost accessible by reducing by the learning curve, but there are limits, we recognise that. Now what will tend to happen is if you introduce a lessons learned regime within a project, you will get an improvement. It will actually work. And you'll get a curve as you repeat the exercise, in this case for drilling wells in an area. It might be building homes in a development. You're going to get improvement through repetition, no doubt about it. And the change that happens because of your lessons learned will improve your cost performance. But here's the big message. If you in fact preload, if you in fact go out and deliberately try and learn before you start a project from other projects, you get this shape of curve. Much, much more effective. Some real world examples. Shell drilling in Azerbaijan got a 40% reduction between oil fields by learning lessons from the previous oil field. Shahadran project, North Sea with BP, got the same effect, and they've told us $81 million benefit. At $81 million, it's probably worth putting a bit of effort into this. Now you may not get $81 million, but you will get those curves. How steep those curves are, it depends on how good your lessons learned program is. NOCO did a survey of around 70 or 80 companies around the world. We asked them about their lessons learned. Now, 3/4 of them said, yes, we've tried at least to do lessons learned. We asked them how good their lessons learned were, and they gave themselves 48%. So a lot of people tried, and only half been successful. 62% said they were collecting lessons, which is good. The problem was they're not going anywhere. This is lessons observed. And time again as we go around we see lessons observed as the outcome. It's recorded, nothing happens. Colonel Ash Power, the head of Australian Joint Operation Command, said at the international conference last year that the Army is very good at learning lessons. It learns the same lesson over and over and over again. Interesting enough, 47% supported their lessons learned on a database and 32% had the ability to search. So your knowledge seekers were in trouble immediately. So that's a pretty poor picture. Added to which, there are actually some wicked problems in dealing with projects and lessons learned. First of all, nobody's got any time. Of course they have. The lessons learned regime need not be a comprehensive, complex setup, particularly to start with. I'm suggesting start off with your stand-up meetings, which all projects have at the start of every day, and just simply ask the question, what did we learn yesterday that's going to help us tomorrow? And see what you get. Now, it's very interesting when that happens. First of all, people will be shocked that they're even asked, and it will take some time for those messages to start coming back to you, but they will come. The other aspect when you're doing that is to realise that there are two sorts of learning. There's organisational learning, that is adding to the sum total knowledge of your project management environment and your organisation. But there's also personal learnings. So somebody may have learned something yesterday which everybody else knew or others knew, so you haven't actually increased your organisational learning, but that person did. And that's an opportunity for you to go back and, as Bob says, start off your mentoring. How did you find it? Was our training good enough? How would you change the training? Suddenly you're getting the lessons learned coming back on the training, at least. So it's a good way to start, a nice soft approach to it. But time is a wicked thing, and I suggest if you're going to make $81 million, you might want to find the time. But whatever that figure is for you will determine what that segment is. There are other wicked problems. Now, a wicked problem is one that either has no solution or is very difficult to solve. So I'm not telling you that you're going to be able to suddenly set aside 4 days to go off and do lessons learning. And don't try that. Just fit it in where you can. Another wicked problem we have is a cultural one. In Asia, nobody ever made a mistake that they will admit to. All of the lessons learned we get from Asia are how good we were, how we're passing on, for the benefit of everybody else. Getting to Australia, and particularly, absolutely nothing went right. It's a total disaster, mate. Shocking. Culturally, what you need to do, the country fire service that I work with are very good at this. They start off every debrief with what were the positives, to set the scene for the whole lessons learned experience. What were the positives? So, you know, you've got the big Pmiakmll fires and the Eden Gully fires, and they will always start off with the positives. And I can tell you now, without going to the debrief, what the big positive was. But it's the same positive from the Sorell fires in Tasmania 2 years ago. Nobody died. And so, you know, you've got to give yourself a round of applause for the obvious. If you're building a house and the house is there, hooray, the house is there. Celebrate the positives. But capturing positive lessons is quite difficult, and you actually have to go out and drive it. The second thing is you're dealing with these bloody project managers. Now, they're an interesting breed. They're rather like lawyers. Stephen Duffield up in Queensland is doing a PhD on why project managers don't collaborate with each other. Quite an observed phenomenon. And he believes it's because they are all queuing up to compete for the next plum project. And he's looking for how we get mitigation strategies to get around that. And I'm sweating on his research. There's a few other people, Richard Vines is helping him out on that. And it's an interesting philosophical problem, and it's a bigger problem. If your project managers are competitive, they are going to hang back on sharing. The other thing is you're probably using contractors. And therefore, the knowledge might be held by the contractor. Now, when Rowena's pumping stations are going in, the project is learning a lot about pumps. And if you put in a lessons learned regime there, you're going to get a lot of stuff back about pumps, which should be passed on to the SA water maintenance team. So out of your project, you are now beginning to get a value add that you can pass back to your end client. This may be something you want to put in your promotional literature, something to think about. The other thing is stakeholders. Now, Matthew Loxton, previously with Health in Queensland, now with one of the think tanks in the US, last week published a very interesting thing. When a consultant says interesting, it really means, I wish I'd thought of this. What he points out is that as you, as the PMO, push your projects out into what we call the real world and do projects for people, as you go further from the centre of power and down in the organisation, you find less and less people who are actually aware of the role that they're going to play in the project. And that's what he sees as a big blind spot. And what he's saying is, if you implement a lessons learned regime at that point, then that feedback will greatly enlighten your stakeholder engagement. And I'm suggesting that if you want to start off with lessons learned, that may not be a bad pilot area to try. Just see how you go. Just get your stakeholders to start giving you feedback on what went right and what went wrong. The other thing to tell you is there is assistance and tools. So I talked about all the services in the wheel, and we went away again and had another look at that survey. They all thought, they gave themselves 48 out of 100. When we marked it, we dropped it to 38 because they were kidding themselves. 62% they were getting good recognition of lessons coming in, but they had nothing to support it. So we went ahead and we built the Lessons Management Hub, both as a resource and a vehicle. And the reason I mention that is that it parallels things like Pmiakmll and Microsoft Project. Because those products exist, you as a PMO can expect that projects are going to be planned. So what we're saying is, because something like LMH exists, lessons learned now becomes very low-hanging fruit for you. It can be done. Put it in, follow the bouncing ball, and they will get a result. Now, we went a bit further in that I mentioned BP and I mentioned Shell and I mentioned the Defence Forces. We went around and had a look at all their lessons learned systems, and we found a whole lot of holes in those. And we went through and we addressed all of these issues which were not in their system. Now, these companies, although they have defective systems in our view, incomplete, and they have problems, they are making a lot of money out of their lessons learned system. And they're making even more money out of the knowledge. So, where are we going? Remember, this is what success looks like. You will get those curves. The size of the savings is entirely up to you as to how well you do it. Next thing, that's the Nike swoosh. What's the Nike slogan? Exactly what it was. Just go out there and do it and see what happens. And you'll get a greater appreciation of what I'm talking about. And thirdly, help us at hand. So out on the table is a handout. In there are all the good links. It's all free downloadable material. There's also a link to that product. There's a link also to that survey, which I did. And please go around and do the survey. Do not tick the guest box. Please put in your name. If you don't want to have your organisation identified, please put in PMIA. And that way, if I get a reasonable number of surveys, I'll produce a benchmark of this group. At the end of the survey, you can leave your email address, pick up our quarterly newsletter. If you do that, we will give you back immediately a benchmark, your score against your industry in Australia and your industry worldwide. So that's, by the way, the survey works. My name is Ian. Thank you for having me. I learn lessons and process. Thank you.